Hey guys, tonight we are stepping softly back in time, not just a few years, but centuries. Picture this: the night air in Valencia, Spain, is surprisingly mild, carrying the faint scent of orange blossoms and the distant, almost imperceptible murmur of the Mediterranean. You're there, a silent observer, as the seeds of an empire, a rather notorious one at that, are just beginning to stir. We're diving deep into the origins of the Borgia family, a name that would later echo through the marble halls of Rome with a mixture of awe and, let's be frank, a healthy dose of trepidation, sticking with them through their rise. It's a bit like volunteering to taste test every dish at a banquet where the host has a known fondness for exotic spices. You probably won't survive this with your innocence entirely intact, but the story's unforgettable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps these tales reach other curious minds. And, as always, I'd love to see where you're joining from and what time it is for you. Pop it in the comments now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is, let's say, somewhere in the early 1400s. You find yourself not in the grand palaces of Rome just yet, but in the sun-drenched lands of the Kingdom of Aragon, specifically Valencia. Imagine the narrow, winding streets of a town like Játiva, the stone houses huddled close, their windows like dark eyes in the fading light of dusk. The Borgia family, or Borgia as it's spelled in their native tongue, are landed gentry here. They're nobles, yes, but not exactly the headline act of Spanish aristocracy. Think of them as having a solid regional presence, respected, comfortable, but perhaps not yet dreaming of the immense power that awaits them across the sea in Italy. The scent of dust from the dry hills mingles with that ever-present hint of citrus from the groves that dot the landscape. A fragrance that will linger in the memories of those who leave. A subtle reminder of simpler beginnings. Your gaze settles on a figure, a man named Alphonse de Borgia. He's scholarly, deeply learned in law, both canon and civil. Picture him in a quiet room, the only light from a flickering oil lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on walls lined with heavy books. The night is quiet, save for the distant barking of a dog or the chime of a church bell marking the late hour. Alphonse is not a warrior. His battlefield is the complex world of ecclesiastical politics and legal debate. He possesses a keen intellect and a patient, determined ambition that burns like a slow, steady flame. He's a man who understands that true power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers its way through carefully crafted arguments and strategic alliances. Even now, in these relatively humble beginnings, you can sense a gravitas about him, a feeling that he is destined for more than the local courts of Valencia. He's the kind of man who probably color-coded his scrolls, for maximum medieval efficiency. The church at this time is a colossal institution, a spiritual empire, but also a temporal one, deeply enmeshed in the political fabric of Europe. And it's a bit of a mess. Truth be told, the Great Western Schism, with its rival popes, has only recently been patched up, and the call for reform is a constant, low hum beneath the surface of daily life. Alphonse, with his legal expertise, finds his skills increasingly in demand. He serves the Aragonese crown, navigating delicate diplomatic missions. He becomes a trusted advisor, a man known for his discretion and his sharp mind. This is where the journey truly begins, not with a thunderclap, but with the rustle of parchment and the quiet intensity of a scholar burning the midnight oil. It's through his service and intellect that Alphonse begins his ascent. He is appointed Bishop of Valencia, a significant honor, bringing him back to his roots but with newfound authority. You see him then, perhaps, walking through the cool stone cloisters of the cathedral, his dark robes sweeping silently behind him. The prayers of the faithful are a soft murmur in the vast space, the scent of old incense clinging to the air. His ambition isn't just personal. There's a sense that he carries the hopes of his family with him. After all, in this era, family was everything. Your safety net, your springboard, your original social network. Far more effective than any carefully curated LinkedIn profile today. The pivotal moment for the Borgia family's Italian destiny comes with Alphonse's deeper involvement in papal affairs. He champions the cause of Pope Martin V and his successor, Eugenius IV, at a time when the papacy is struggling to reassert its authority. This loyalty does not go unnoticed. Eventually, Alphonse is made a cardinal. Imagine the journey to Rome, not a comfortable flight with in-flight entertainment and a tiny bag of pretzels, but a long, arduous trek by land or a perilous voyage by sea. You're with him, metaphorically of course, feeling the sway of the carriage or the roll of the ship, the damp chill of the nights, the dust of the roads. Rome, when he finally arrives, is a city of staggering contrasts, ancient ruins standing cheek by jowl with bustling medieval streets, magnificent churches rising amidst squalor. It's a city of whispers, of power plays enacted in shadowy basilicas and torchlit palazzi. It's a place where fortunes can be made and lost with dizzying speed. And it is in Rome that Alphonse de Borgia, now a prince of the church, truly plants the seeds for his family's future. He's an outsider, a Spaniard in a city dominated by Italian factions. But he's astute. He works hard, lives relatively modestly for a cardinal of his standing, and builds a reputation for impartiality, which in the politically charged atmosphere of Rome is a rare and valuable commodity. He's not a man for lavish parties or ostentatious displays of wealth, at least not yet. His rooms in the Vatican would be filled with books and legal documents, the air thick with the scent of old paper and sealing wax, the silence broken only by the scratch of his quill. Then, in 1455, the unexpected happens. After a short conclave, Alphonse de Borgia is elected pope, taking the name Calixtus III. This is a major historical fact, the first Spanish pope, an event that sends ripples throughout Italy and beyond. He's an old man by this time, already in his late 70s, considered by many to be a compromise candidate, a caretaker pope. They probably didn't expect him to shake things up too much. Oh, how wrong they could be when it came to a Borgia. Calixtus III, despite his age, is no pushover. His papacy is largely focused on organizing a crusade against the Ottoman Turks, who had recently conquered Constantinople. But he also has another focus: his family. And this is where our story begins to narrow in on the next generation. Calixtus, like many popes of his era, practiced nepotism, elevating his relatives to positions of power and influence. It was a way to ensure loyalty, to build a power base in a city full of shifting allegiances. Some historians continue to debate the precise motivations and extent of Calixtus's nepotism. whether it was primarily a pragmatic tool for governance in a hostile environment or a more naked power grab for the Borgia family name. He brings his nephews to Rome. Two, in particular, are key to our story. Pedro Luis de Borgia, who is showered with titles and responsibilities, becoming Captain General of the Church, a powerful military commander. And then there's Rodrigo de Borgia, younger, charming, and incredibly intelligent. You see young Rodrigo, perhaps in his late teens or early 20s, arriving in this dazzling, dangerous city. The night air of Rome is different from Valencia, heavier, laden with the Tiber's dampness and the clamor of a much larger, more complex metropolis. Distant sounds of revelry from one palazzo might mingle with the mournful chant from a nearby monastery. Rodrigo is ambitious, and he learns quickly. He studies law at the prestigious University of Bologna, just as his uncle did. But you sense a different kind of fire in him. While Alphonse was the scholar, Rodrigo seems to possess a more worldly cunning, a charisma that draws people to him. Under his uncle, Pope Calixtus III, Rodrigo is made a cardinal deacon at a young age, along with his brother or cousin. Historical records sometimes blur these familial lines. Pedro Luis. This is his entry into the high-stakes game of papal politics. Imagine him, robed in the crimson of a cardinal, a stark contrast to the dusty, muted colors of his Valencian youth. The lamplight catches the richness of the fabric, the glint of a jeweled ring. He's handsome, articulate, and possesses an undeniable energy. He's also, by all accounts, already demonstrating a fondness for the finer things in life, a trait that will become much more pronounced later. One can only imagine the medieval equivalent of a shopping spree, perhaps commissioning a new, particularly ostentatious set of robes. Calixtus III's reign is relatively short, just over 3 years. His efforts to launch a crusade are met with limited success, and his favoritism towards his Catalan relatives, the Catalans, as the Italians somewhat derisively called them, breeds resentment among the powerful Roman families. When Calixtus dies in 1458, there's a backlash. Pedro Luis, who had become widely disliked, is forced to flee Rome and dies soon after. It seems, for a moment, that the Borgia ascendancy might be a brief footnote, a temporary anomaly. But Rodrigo is different. He's more adaptable, more skilled in the subtle arts of Roman politics. He weathers the storm. He remains a cardinal, a wealthy and influential one, and he has decades ahead of him to learn, to plan, and to climb. As you stand in the shadows of this bustling, ancient city, watching young Cardinal Rodrigo de Borgia navigate the complex corridors of power, you sense that the story of this family is far from over. The scent of those Valencian orange blossoms is now a distant memory, replaced by the sharper, more intoxicating aroma of Roman ambition. The stars above are the same, but the dreams they witness are growing larger, more audacious, and infinitely more perilous. The initial foundation has been laid, not by grand conquest, but by intellect, by patience, and by a keen understanding of how the levers of power truly work. Even if it's a system more convoluted than assembling a chariot with instructions written in ancient Sumerian, the quiet Spanish nights have given way to the charged, watchful darkness of Rome, where every shadow might hold a rival, and every whispered word could seal a destiny. The dust from Calixtus's brief, fiery reign settles, and Rome, as it always does, moves on. You might think Rodrigo, the young Spanish cardinal, would fade into the background, a relic of a temporary regime. especially after the hasty departure and demise of his kinsman Pedro Luis. But as you watch from the shadowy archways of the Vatican, a soft rain beginning to fall outside, whispering against the ancient cobblestones and blurring the flickering torchlight, you see that Rodrigo de Borgia is a man who knows how to play the long game. He doesn't just weather the storm that followed his uncle's death. He seems to draw strength from it, his roots sinking deeper into the complex soil of Roman power. The immediate aftermath of Calixtus III's papacy is indeed a precarious time for the Borgias left in Rome. Anti-Catalan sentiment runs high. Yet, Rodrigo navigates these treacherous waters with a skill that belies his relative youth. He's diplomatic, affable when necessary, and possesses an almost preternatural ability to make himself useful. And one of the most significant signs of his resilience and capability is his appointment and subsequent long tenure as Vice-Chancellor of the Holy Roman Church. This wasn't just any job. It was one of the most powerful administrative posts in the Curia, effectively making him the Pope's chief minister and head of the papal chancery. You see him in his new offices, perhaps late at night, the city's distant hum a backdrop to the rustle of important documents. Lamplight gleams on the polished wood of his desk, piled high with letters, decrees, and petitions from every corner of Christendom. The air smells of ink, parchment, and the faint metallic scent of the coins that pass through the church's coffers. For over 3 decades, spanning the reigns of 5 different popes, Pius II, Paul II, Sixtus II, and Innocent VIII, Rodrigo Borgia remains vice-chancellor. This is a truly remarkable feat of political survival and administrative prowess, a mainstream historical fact that underscores his indispensability. He became practically part of the Vatican furniture, like a particularly ambitious and surprisingly permanent hat stand. This position gives him immense influence. He oversees the drafting of papal bulls, manages church finances, and has his finger on the pulse of every significant appointment and decision. It's a role that requires not just intellect and diligence, but also an extraordinary capacity for diplomacy and, let's be honest, a certain talent for navigating the intricate web of patronage and power that defined Renaissance Rome. The extent to which Rodrigo's personal charm versus his sheer administrative indispensability secured his long tenure as vice-chancellor is something academic circles still gently mull over. Imagine the sheer volume of correspondence that crosses his desk. Letters from kings and emperors, pleas from bishops in distant lands, reports from papal legates. You watch him dictate to his scribes, his voice calm and measured, choosing his words with care. He's building a network, not just of allies, but of people indebted to him. A favor done here, a promotion facilitated there. These things are remembered, and Rodrigo has a very long memory. He also amasses a colossal personal fortune. The vice-chancellorship is a lucrative post, and Rodrigo is no stranger to its financial benefits. Furthermore, he accumulates a vast portfolio of bishoprics, abbeys, and other benefices across Europe. His personal address book for church properties must have been thicker than a list of excuses for why you haven't started your New Year's resolutions yet. These aren't just sources of income. They are outposts of his influence, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of his power. You see him attending consistories, his crimson robes a familiar sight in the candlelit halls where the cardinals gather. He's learned to hold his tongue when necessary, to observe, to listen to the undercurrents of debate. He knows when to speak and when to let others reveal their hands. He's a Spaniard in an Italian world, and while that could be a disadvantage, he turns it into a kind of strength, cultivating an image of being slightly above the fray of the constantly warring Italian factions, even as he masterfully plays them against each other. The night often finds him in quiet consultation, perhaps in a secluded Vatican apartment or a discreet villa on the outskirts of Rome. The windows shuttered against the damp air, the soft clink of wine goblets, the low murmur of voices discussing matters that could alter the fate of nations. This is the soundtrack to his patient accumulation of power. During these decades, Rome itself is a city in constant flux. Popes come and go, each with their own ambitions, their own building projects, their own nephews to promote. Sixtus IV, for example, a Franciscan, focuses on enriching his della Rovere relatives, including the formidable Giuliano della Rovere, a man who will become one of Rodrigo's most bitter rivals. Innocent VIII's papacy is marked by financial difficulties and a somewhat languid approach to governance. Through all this, Rodrigo Borgia not only survives, but thrives. He adapts his style, offers his expertise, and makes himself indispensable to each successive pontiff. He understands that true power is not always about grand pronouncements, but about the steady, meticulous work done in the quiet hours, away from the public gaze. Remember those quiet, scholarly nights of his uncle Alphonse in Valencia. Rodrigo has inherited that capacity for patient toil, but he's added a layer of worldly finesse and a much grander vision. It's also during these long years as a cardinal that Rodrigo's personal life takes a shape that will become legendary and notorious. While celibacy was the rule for clergy, it was an open secret that many high-ranking churchmen had discreet relationships and even families. Rodrigo is no exception. You observe, from a respectful distance, of course, his long and significant relationship with Vannozza de Catane. She isn't a fleeting dalliance. Vannozza is a woman of some standing, and their connection lasts for many years. She is the mother of his 4 most famous children, Cesare, Giovanni, Lucrezia, and Geoffrey. These children are born while he is a cardinal, acknowledged by him, and provided for. Imagine Vannozza's household, perhaps a comfortable but not ostentatious house in a respectable Roman neighborhood. The sounds of children, though kept discreetly from the official narrative of the cardinal's life, are there. The soft glow of lamplight from her windows on a rainy evening, a haven of domesticity that exists in parallel to Rodrigo's public life of high church politics. Vannozza herself seems to have been a pragmatic and intelligent woman, managing her affairs and those of her children with skill. She was the master of the nothing to see here, just raising future political powerhouses while maintaining plausible deniability for my very important cardinal patron school of thought. The precise nature of her influence on Rodrigo, beyond being the mother of his cherished children, is something historians still ponder, sifting through property records and contemporary accounts for clues. Rodrigo's affection for his children is, by all accounts, genuine and deep. This paternal devotion will become a driving force in his later actions, for good or ill. He doesn't just provide for them financially, he has ambitions for them. Grand ambitions that are already beginning to take shape in his mind as they grow from infants to young children. You can almost picture him, slipping away from the formalities of the Vatican, perhaps under the cover of a moonless night, the cobblestones slick with mist, to spend a few precious hours with his family, the stern cardinal momentarily replaced by a doting father. The scent of wood smoke from a nearby bakery might mingle with the damp earthiness of a private garden, a world away from the incense and ancient stone of the basilicas. As the years turn into decades, Rodrigo Borgia, Cardinal Vice-Chancellor, becomes a towering figure in Rome. He's seen it all, heard it all. He's amassed wealth, built a network of loyalties, and cultivated an understanding of the human heart, its ambitions, its weaknesses, its desires. He is a man of sophisticated tastes, a patron of the arts, a charming host when he chooses to be. He is also a man of formidable intellect and unyielding will. The crimson of his robes seems to symbolize not just his rank, but the burning, relentless ambition that has guided him along this long path. The night sky over Rome has wheeled through countless seasons since he first arrived as a young protege of his uncle. Now, he is one of the old guard, a kingmaker, a man who many believe is simply biding his time until the ultimate prize is within his grasp. The whispers in the Vatican antechambers, the knowing glances exchanged in torchlit courtyards, all suggest that Rodrigo Borgia's shadow is growing longer, reaching towards the very pinnacle of power. The summer of 1492 hangs heavy over Rome, not just with the relentless August heat that shimmers above the cobblestones and makes the Tiber's breath feel thick and warm even at midnight, but with anticipation. Pope Innocent VIII is dead. The chair of St. Peter is empty, and in the labyrinthine corridors of the Vatican, and indeed in every palazzo where a cardinal draws breath, the game is truly afoot. You feel it in the air, a restless energy, a sense of momentous decisions looming in the candlelit dimness, the soft, almost mournful tolling of church bells announcing the Pope's passing has given way to a different kind of sound, the hushed, urgent whispers of negotiation, of alliances forming and reforming like shadows in a flickering fire. The city itself holds its breath. During this period, known as the sede vacante, the vacant see, Rome can be a volatile place. Without a pope, law and order sometimes fray at the edges. But your attention, and indeed the attention of all of Christendom, is fixed on the men who hold the city's destiny in their hands, the College of Cardinals. 23 of them, in this instance, will enter the conclave, the sacred and secret process of electing the next vicar of Christ, and among them, a familiar figure, Rodrigo Borgia, Cardinal Vice-Chancellor, now in his early 60s, his dark eyes missing nothing. Remember that quiet patience he showed for decades, that meticulous gathering of influence. It was all leading here to this crucible. The cardinals begin to assemble, each arriving with their small retinue, their baggage not just containing robes and personal effects, but also the weight of expectations from their families, their patrons, their home states. The main contenders quickly become apparent. There's the formidable Giuliano della Rovere, a man of fierce ambition and stern demeanor, a nephew of the former Pope Sixtus IV, and a powerful figure in his own right. Then there's Ascanio Sforza, brother of Ludovico Sforza, the Moor, ruler of Milan, a prince of the church with the backing of one of Italy's most powerful dynasties. And, of course, there is Rodrigo Borgia himself, dean of the College of Cardinals by seniority, immensely wealthy, and with decades of experience running the Vatican machinery. He is, perhaps, the most prepared, but also, to some, the most feared. On the 6th of August, the cardinals process into the Vatican and are sealed within the confines of the conclave. The chosen location is the Sistine Chapel. Its famous ceiling fresco by Michelangelo, still decades in the future, but its walls already adorned with magnificent paintings by Botticelli, Perugino, and Ghirlandaio, works commissioned by Sixtus IV. This is a mainstream historical fact. This sacred space, relatively new at the time, became the theater for this intense spiritual and political drama. Imagine yourself a fly on those newly painted walls, or perhaps a mouse scurrying in the rafters, looking down. The great doors are locked and barred from both outside and in. Guards are posted. No communication with the outside world is permitted. In theory, at least. The windows are shuttered, casting the vast chapel into a perpetual twilight, lit by flickering candles and oil lamps. The air grows thick with the scent of melting wax, old incense, and the unwashed bodies of men confined in close quarters during a sweltering Roman summer. The culinary experience inside was probably less heavenly banquet and more mystery meat surprise, if they were lucky and the supplies held out. The days inside the conclave stretch out, marked by the rhythm of mass, prayer, and the all-important scrutinies, the secret ballots. Each cardinal writes his chosen name on a slip of parchment, carefully disguising his handwriting. These are collected, counted, and if no candidate receives the necessary 2/3 majority, the ballots are burned, the smoke signaling to the expectant crowds in St. Peter's Square that no pope has yet been chosen. The black smoke, sfumata nera, becomes a familiar sight. The tension is palpable. You can almost hear the silent calculations, the reassessments after each failed vote. Alliances shift. Promises are made in hushed conversations in shadowy corners, during the meager meals, or in the small cells assigned to each cardinal for rest. Trying to get a straight answer out of a cardinal during conclave about who they really voted for would be harder than teaching a cat to do your taxes. Rodrigo Borgia is a master of this intricate dance. He knows the strengths and weaknesses of his fellow cardinals, their ambitions, their debts, their desires, and he has resources. Vast resources. Whispers begin to circulate, growing louder with each passing day, that Borgia is not just relying on his long service or his administrative genius. The word simony, the buying or selling of ecclesiastical offices or preferment, starts to be muttered, first in hushed tones, then more openly, at least outside the conclave walls. Accusations fly that Rodrigo is promising lucrative positions, abbacies, bishoprics, even his own opulent palace and its contents, in exchange for votes. The most famous of these stories, perhaps embellished over time but persistent, involves 4 mule loads of silver being dispatched to a key cardinal, Ascanio Sforza, to secure his support when his own bid for the papacy falters. The exact nature and extent of simony in the 1492 conclave, particularly concerning Borgia's promises, is a point over which historical narratives still diverge quite significantly. Some argue it was rampant, a blatant purchase of the papacy. Others suggest that while promises of future appointments were certainly made, a common, if ethically dubious, practice in such elections, the more lurid tales of outright bribery were exaggerated by Borgia's enemies later on. It was, in many ways, like a high-stakes reality TV show, but with eternal salvation supposedly on the line, more velvet, and significantly less chance of a lucrative tell-all book deal afterwards. Unless you became pope, of course. Then you wrote the rules. What is clear is that Borgia was an incredibly effective negotiator and understood the currency of power in all its forms. He didn't just offer vague hopes. He could deliver tangible benefits. The voting continues. Della Rovere remains a strong contender, but he cannot quite reach the threshold. Ascanio Sforza, realizing his own chances are slim, becomes a pivotal figure if the stories are true, and if his support shifts to Borgia, the tide could turn. Imagine the scene on the night of August 10th, leading into the early morning of the 11th. The air in the Sistine Chapel is thick, almost unbreathable with heat, exhaustion, and anticipation. Candles burn low, casting long, dancing shadows that make the figures on the walls seem to writhe and whisper. The cardinals are weary, their faces pale in the dim light. Another scrutiny is called. This time, as the votes are read out, a pattern begins to emerge. One by one, names are called, and then, with increasing frequency, Rodrigo Borgia, Cardinal Vice-Chancellor. You can sense the shift in the room, the almost electric charge as the tally climbs. 15, 16, 17. The number needed is 18 for a 2/3 majority of the 23 present. Some sources say 22 were needed for the 2/3 majority, but this is a small detail often debated regarding exact numbers present at the final vote. The tension is unbearable. And then, it happens. Rodrigo Borgia has secured the required votes. A low murmur erupts, a mixture of triumph from his supporters and perhaps dismay or disbelief from others. He is asked the traditional question, "Acceptas ne electionem de te canonice factum in summum pontificem?" Do you accept your canonical election as supreme pontiff? 1. His response, though perhaps a formality by this point, seals his destiny. He accepts, and he chooses his papal name, Alexander VI, a name that will echo through history, laden with controversy, splendor, and infamy. The doors of the conclave are unbarred. The traditional white smoke, fumata bianca, finally billows from the chimney, signaling to the waiting city that a new pope has been chosen. As dawn breaks over Rome, the news spreads like wildfire. Rodrigo Borgia, the Spaniard, the long-serving vice-chancellor, the father of a growing family, is now Pope Alexander VI. The reaction is mixed. There is official rejoicing, the pealing of bells, the Te Deums sung in churches. But among the Roman populace and the Italian powers, there is also a sense of unease, even fear. They know Borgia. They know his ambition, his wealth, his capabilities, and they suspect that his papacy will be unlike any they have seen before. The candlelit gamble in the hushed darkness of the Sistine Chapel has paid off. The crimson path of the cardinal has led to the papal throne. The shadows of the Vatican are about to acquire a new and altogether more formidable master. The white smoke has cleared. The echoes of the Te Deum have faded from the vastness of St. Peter's Basilica, and Rodrigo Borgia is now Pope Alexander VI. You see him, perhaps standing on a balcony of the Apostolic Palace late one evening, the city of Rome sprawling beneath him like a jeweled tapestry in the deepening twilight. The air is cooler now, the fierce August heat finally receding into a more temperate autumn. But any relief is short-lived. The whispers that had once followed Cardinal Borgia now swirl around Pope Alexander VI, louder and more insistent, carrying on the night breeze that rustles the heavy tapestries within his private chambers. The weight of the papal tiara is more than just symbolic. It's the burden of a church to lead, a city to govern, and a continent teetering on the brink of momentous change. The faint scent of those Valencian orange blossoms, if he ever thought of them now, must have seemed like a fragrance from another lifetime. Another world entirely. His first actions as Pope are swift and decisive. Rome, often unruly during a sede vacante, had become particularly chaotic. Alexander moves to restore order with a firm hand, and for a brief while, he enjoys a honeymoon period. Justice is seen to be done, provisions are made for the city, and there's a general sense of a capable administrator taking charge. You witness the pomp of his coronation, the elaborate processions, the display of papal majesty designed to inspire awe and affirm his authority. The Vatican, already a place of grandeur, seems to hum with renewed energy under its new master. He is, after all, a man who has spent decades preparing for this role, who understands the intricate machinery of this vast institution better than anyone. But the calm is deceptive. The Italian peninsula is a tinderbox of rivalrous states: Milan, Venice, Florence, Naples, and the papal states themselves, all vying for power and influence. Alliances shift like sand dunes in a desert wind, or perhaps more accurately, like a toddler's favorite toy. One minute it's this, the next it's that. And woe betide anyone who gets in the way of a sudden tantrum. Alexander, as Pope, is not just a spiritual leader but a temporal prince, a key player in this dangerous game. And his family, the Borgias, are now papal family. His son Cesare, barely 18, is soon made a cardinal, a move that raises eyebrows but is hardly unprecedented in an age of rampant nepotism. His other son, Giovanni, is earmarked for a secular career, destined for titles and military command. Lucrezia, his beloved daughter, is still young, but her future marriage will undoubtedly become a valuable political chess piece. Whether Alexander's initial policies were driven more by a desire to establish his family's dynastic power or by a genuine concern for the stability of the papal states is a question that continues to elicit varied perspectives from historians. It was likely a complex intertwining of both. Beyond the shores of Italy, other powers are watching. Spain, his homeland, is a rising force, newly unified under Ferdinand and Isabella, and France, under the ambitious young King Charles VIII, has its eyes fixed on the Kingdom of Naples, claiming an old Angevin inheritance. The whispers of an impending French invasion grow louder, carried on the winds across the Alps. You can imagine Alexander in his private study late at night, the only sounds the crackle of the fire in the hearth and the distant cry of a nightbird. Maps are spread out on a large table, lamplight glinting on the names of cities and territories. He confers with ambassadors, with cardinals, with his closest advisors, his expression thoughtful, perhaps a little weary. He has to juggle more delicate negotiations than a clown with a dozen flaming torches and an allergy to smoke. One of his significant early acts on the world stage is the issuance of the papal bull Inter Caetera in May 1493. This is a key historical fact. This decree aimed to divide the newly discovered lands of the Americas between Spain and Portugal, drawing a line of demarcation down the Atlantic. It's a testament to the immense global influence the papacy still wielded, or at least was perceived to wield. Imagine him dictating the terms of this bull, shaping the destiny of continents yet unseen by most Europeans, all from his lamplit study in Rome, the fate of millions being decided by the stroke of a quill. But the New World is a distant concern when a storm is brewing in his own backyard. Charles VIII of France is not just making vague threats, he's assembling a formidable army. His intention is to march the length of Italy, claim Naples, and perhaps, some even whisper, continue eastward to launch a new crusade. Ludovico Sforza of Milan initially an ally of Alexander, actively encourages Charles, hoping to use the French to destabilize his own rivals in Naples. It's a dangerous game of brinkmanship. Alexander tries to form a league of Italian states to resist the French, but Italian unity is a fragile thing, easily shattered by mutual suspicion and self-interest. In the late summer of 1494, the storm breaks. Charles VIII, with a large modern army equipped with advanced artillery, crosses the Alps. They aren't exactly subtle tourists, more like a very large, very loud, heavily armed tour group with a particularly aggressive itinerary. Their advance is terrifyingly swift. Italian city-states, accustomed to protracted wars fought by mercenary condottieri, are stunned by the speed and ferocity of the French. Florence, under the sway of the preacher Savonarola, who sees Charles as a divine scourge sent to purify Italy, offers little resistance. The Medici are driven out. Panic begins to ripple through Rome. You are there as the news reaches the Vatican. Couriers arrive, breathless and dust-stained, their horses lathered. The city outside the apostolic palace is a murmur of anxious voices. Inside, the corridors buzz with worried officials. Alexander VI remains outwardly calm, but the pressure is immense. His initial stance is one of defiance. He refuses Charles' passage through papal territory. He fortifies Rome. He even attempts to build an alliance with the Ottoman Sultan Bajazet II against the French, a move that scandalizes Christendom, but demonstrates his desperate pragmatism. Some historians suggest this was a masterstroke of diplomacy, while others condemn it as a cynical betrayal of Christian interests for personal gain. As the French army draws inexorably closer, marching down the Italian boot, Alexander's position becomes untenable. His Italian allies are wavering or have already switched sides. His own city is restless. His enemy, Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, who had fled to France, is with Charles VIII, urging him to depose Alexander on grounds of his simoniacal election. The threat is not just military, but canonical. You can sense the tightening circle around the Pope. The nights in the Vatican must have been long and filled with urgent, whispered consultations. The very air seems charged with impending crisis. Perhaps a real storm breaks over Rome, the rain lashing against the windows of the papal apartments, mirroring the turmoil within. By December 1494, Charles VIII is at the gates of Rome. There is no realistic way for Alexander to resist the French army without risking the utter destruction of the city and his own capture or death. He is forced to negotiate. It's a humiliating moment. He must allow the French king and his army to enter Rome peacefully. Imagine the scene: the French troops, imposing and alien, marching through the ancient streets, their banners fluttering, their armor gleaming in the winter sun. Charles VIII himself enters the city, and for a period, he and Pope Alexander VI are in the same place, an uneasy and highly charged cohabitation. The Pope is in effect a well-guarded guest in his own palace. Meetings take place between the two potentates. Charles, young and somewhat gangly, full of romantic notions of chivalry and conquest. Alexander, older, more experienced, a master of subtle diplomacy even in adversity. The Pope has to concede much. He grants Charles free passage through the papal states towards Naples. He hands over hostages, including his own son, Cardinal Cesare Borgia, who is to accompany the French army, though Cesare, ever resourceful, will manage to escape not long after. He must also yield certain fortresses, It's a bitter pill to swallow. But Alexander plays for time, ever the pragmatist. He survives. He remains pope. The French army eventually moves south, leaving Rome shaken but intact. They conquer Naples with relative ease, but their triumph is short-lived. The very speed and brutality of the French invasion finally galvanizes the Italian states, and indeed other European powers like Spain and the Holy Roman Emperor, into action. A new alliance, the League of Venice, is formed against Charles VIII, with Pope Alexander VI as a key architect. The hunter becomes the hunted. Charles VIII, fearing being trapped in southern Italy, is forced to fight his way back north. As this first great wave of foreign invasion recedes, leaving Italy profoundly changed. Pope Alexander VI has weathered his first major storm. He has been humiliated, threatened, and constrained, but he is still on the papal throne. The turbulent dawn of his papacy has shown him, and the world, the precariousness of power, even papal power. In a ruthless age, the lamplit halls of the Vatican have witnessed fear, desperation, and cunning maneuvering. The game of Italian politics has been irrevocably altered, and the shadow of foreign intervention will hang over the peninsula for decades to come. Alexander has learned, if he didn't know it already, that survival requires more than just faith. It requires resilience, ruthlessness, and an unwavering focus on the shifting tides of power. The path ahead is still fraught with peril, but the Borgia Pope has shown he is a survivor. While Pope Alexander VI navigates the treacherous storms of Italian and European politics, another Borgia is beginning to cast his own long shadow. Initially, from within the very heart of the Church, you turn your gaze to Cesare, the Pope's eldest son by Vanozza de Catane, a young man whose destiny seems pre-written in crimson silk and ecclesiastical titles. The soft, flickering candlelight of a Roman evening finds him not poring over theological texts with devout intensity, but perhaps with a restless energy that the sacred confines of a cardinal's life struggle to contain. He is intelligent, handsome, and possesses a charisma that can be both captivating and unsettling, a potent combination inherited, perhaps, from his father. Remember young Rodrigo, the cardinal. With his own worldly charm and astute mind, Cesare is that amplified, and with considerably less patience for dusty old documents and the sedate pace of clerical life. Born around 1475 or 1476, Cesare was groomed for a high-flying ecclesiastical career from a very young age, while his younger brother, Giovanni, was steered towards secular titles and military leadership as the Duke of Gandia in Spain. Cesare was destined for the Church. His father, even before becoming pope, secured for him the bishopric of Pamplona at the age of 16, followed swiftly by the Archbishopric of Valencia, his own former see, and that of his great-uncle Calixtus III. It was like a family heirloom, this archbishopric, passed down with increasing expectations. Then, shortly after Alexander VI's election, in September 1493, Cesare, barely 18 years old, was made a cardinal deacon of Santa Maria Nuova. This is a documented historical fact, a testament to papal nepotism, certainly, but also to Alexander's immense ambitions for his brilliant, if perhaps wayward, son. Imagine Cesare in his cardinal's robes, the rich crimson, the fine silks. They would have looked magnificent on his athletic frame. He cuts a dashing figure in the religious processions and the consistories. He has his own palace, a retinue of servants, access to immense wealth, and a place at the highest tables of power in Christendom. He's a patron of scholars and artists, known for his cultured tastes. Yet, if you observe him closely, in the unguarded moments when the mask of decorum slips, you might see a flicker of something else in his dark eyes, a glint of steel, a barely suppressed impatience. Cesare in cardinal's robes was a bit like a panther in a petting zoo, magnificent, undeniably impressive, but also slightly terrifying, and clearly longing for wilder, more expansive pastures. His duties as a cardinal would have involved attending religious services, participating in the governance of the church, and offering counsel to his father, the Pope, and he was undoubtedly intelligent enough to perform these tasks adequately when he chose. He had studied law at Perugia and Pisa, and was by no means an uneducated man, but his true inclinations, you sense, lay far from the altar and the chapter meeting. Whispers follow him through the torchlit streets of Rome at night, tales of lavish entertainments, of hunting parties, of a lifestyle more befitting a Renaissance prince than a prince of the church. These rumors are, of course, shrouded in the mists of time and often colored by the animosity towards his family. But they paint a picture of a young man chafing against the constraints of his clerical role. He was present, too, at key political moments. You might recall him being sent as a papal legate, essentially a high-profile hostage, with Charles VIII's army after the French king's occupation of Rome. He didn't stay long, displaying the resourcefulness that would become his hallmark. Cesare managed to slip away from the French camp, probably leaving a very polite note saying, "Terribly sorry. Got rather bored. Important business elsewhere. Toodles." His escape, while an embarrassment for Charles VIII, was a clear indication of Cesare's daring and his unwillingness to be a mere pawn. The turning point, the event that seems to irrevocably alter Cesare's path and the Borgia family's dynastic strategy, occurs in the summer of 1497. It's a dark and tragic episode. Cesare's younger brother, Juan or Giovanni, Duke of Gandia, commander of the papal forces, and the great hope for the secular advancement of the Borgia name, is brutally murdered. One June night, after dining with his mother Vannozza, Giovanni disappears. A few days later, his body, pierced by multiple stab wounds, is dragged from the Tiber River. The city is shocked. Pope Alexander is utterly devastated, plunged into a profound and public grief. The identity of the murderer or murderers remains one of history's most enduring unsolved mysteries, a favorite topic for whispered speculation in the shadowy corners of Roman taverns and palaces alike. Suspects abounded: the vengeful Orsini family, enemies of the Borgias, Cardinal Ascanio Sforza, with whom Giovanni had quarreled, even, some darkly hinted, Cesare himself, jealous of his brother's favor or eager to take his place as the family's secular champion. There is no concrete evidence to support the latter, but the very existence of such rumors speaks to the complex and often ruthless dynamics perceived within the Borgia circle. The death of Giovanni changes everything. The Pope's grief is immense, and for a time, he speaks of reforming the Church, of renouncing his worldly ways. But the dynastic imperative remains. With Giovanni gone, who will now lead the Borgia armies, carve out a state for the family, and ensure their legacy beyond Alexander's own lifetime? All eyes, inevitably, turn to Cesare. He is brilliant, ambitious, and possesses a ruthlessness that his more pleasure-loving brother perhaps lacked. The only obstacle is his scarlet robe, the vows he has taken, the cardinalate that binds him to the church. You can imagine the intense discussions within the Vatican, late at night, between father and son, the lamplight in Alexander's private study casting long shadows as they weigh their options. For Cesare to renounce his cardinalate would be an almost unprecedented step, requiring a special papal dispensation. It would cause scandal. It would confirm the whispers that his ecclesiastical career was never a true vocation. But the alternative, leaving the Borgia family's secular ambitions leaderless, is perhaps even less palatable. The primary motivation behind Cesare's ultimate decision to renounce his cardinalate, whether it was purely personal ambition ignited by new opportunity, a cold-blooded strategic family decision following Giovanni's death, or a genuine, long-held recognition of his profound unsuitability for ecclesiastical life, is a topic that still invites considerable discussion among Renaissance scholars. It was likely a confluence of all these factors, a perfect storm of circumstance and character. Finally, in August 1498, nearly 14 months after Giovanni's death, Cesare Borgia formally petitioned his father, Pope Alexander VI, to be released from his clerical vows and his position as cardinal. He argued that his conscience would not allow him to continue in a role for which he felt no true calling, especially given his concerns for the salvation of his soul if he were to unworthily administer the sacraments. One can only imagine the kind of spiritual torment he'd face if he ever had to hear confessions. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." Cesare, tapping his fingers impatiently, details, or better yet, give me the highlights. And were you at least creative about it? Amateur. Next, the Pope, after a show of deliberation and consultation with other cardinals, many of whom were probably relieved to see this particular panther leave the ecclesiastical enclosure, granted his son's request. Cesare Borgia casts off the crimson robes of a cardinal. The scarlet that had defined his youth is replaced by the silks and velvets of a layman, soon to be the steel of a soldier. He is no longer Cardinal Cesare, but simply Cesare Borgia, a man untethered, ready to forge a new destiny with sword and diplomacy. The transition is symbolic, a profound shift in his identity and in the Borgia family's grand strategy. He is stepping out of the consecrated shadows of the church and into the harsh, often brutal, limelight of Italian power politics. The world watches, holding its breath. What will this brilliant, enigmatic, and now untethered Borgia do next? The whispers intensify, no longer just of scandal, but of a formidable new force about to be unleashed upon the unsuspecting battlefields of Italy. The scent of incense is fading, replaced by the distant, metallic tang of ambition and the promise of conflict. The crimson robes are packed away, perhaps in a cedar chest in some forgotten Vatican storeroom, replaced by the gleam of polished steel and the rich velvet of a secular duke. Cesare Borgia, no longer a prince of the church, steps onto the blood-soaked stage of Italian warfare, and you find yourself riding in his shadow under moonlit banners that bear the bull of the Borgias. The night air is crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke from countless campfires. The man who once debated theology, or at least was supposed to, now debates siege tactics and the most efficient way to bring a rebellious city to heel. His panther-like energy, once constrained by palace walls and church ritual, is now unleashed upon the unsuspecting lordships of the Romagna. His transformation is swift and backed by powerful alliances. Almost immediately after shedding his cardinal's hat, Cesare travels to France. There, King Louis XIII eager for papal support for his own Italian ambitions, namely the conquest of Milan, welcomes him with open arms. Cesare is granted the French Duchy of Valentinois in 1498, a significant French title that leads to his enduring nickname, Il Valentino. This is a well-established historical fact. He also secures a politically advantageous marriage to Charlotte d'Albret, sister to the King of Navarre, further cementing his ties to the French crown. With French backing, French troops, and French money, Cesare now has the resources to pursue the Borgia family's grand territorial ambitions in Italy. No more theoretical discussions on the nature of power. It was time for a practical demonstration. With cannons. The target is the Romagna, a patchwork of small city-states in central Italy, nominally under papal rule but, in reality, governed by a collection of local despots or vicars. These lords, families like the Malatesta of Rimini, the Sforza of Pesaro, and the Manfredi of Faenza, paid lip service to papal authority, but ran their territories as personal fiefdoms. They considered papal authority more of a polite suggestion than an actual rule book, sort of like how some people treat the "please wait for the attendant" sign at self-checkout. Pope Alexander VI's aim, and Cesare's mission, is to bring these territories firmly under direct papal control, creating a strong, centralized Borgia state that could survive even after Alexander himself is gone. So, in late 1499, as Louis XIV invades and quickly conquers Milan, Cesare, at the head of an army composed of French auxiliaries, Swiss mercenaries, and Italian recruits, begins his campaign. You are there, perhaps in his command tent on a windswept hill overlooking a slumbering city, doomed to wake to the sounds of siege. Lamplight flickers over maps spread on a rough wooden table. Cesare, his handsome face intense in concentration, confers with his captains. His voice is calm, decisive. He is known for his meticulous planning and his grasp of logistics, a far cry from the often chaotic and ill-disciplined Italian mercenary armies of the time. The first cities to fall are Imola and Forlì. Forlì, however, presents a formidable challenge in the person of Caterina Sforza, the Lioness of Romagna. A fiery and courageous woman, she is the widow of Girolamo Riario, a nephew of Pope Sixtus IV, and she is determined to defend her city and her children's inheritance. Caterina Sforza wasn't the type to just hand over the keys and offer you a cup of tea if you showed up with an army. She was more likely to offer you a cannonball sandwich from the ramparts. She holes up in the citadel of Forlì, defying Cesare even after the town itself has fallen. The siege is harsh, conducted in the depths of winter. You can almost feel the biting wind, hear the relentless thud of cannonballs against stone walls, the distant shouts of soldiers. Cesare's artillery is relentless, and eventually, the fortress is breached. Caterina is taken prisoner, treated with respect initially, but ultimately sent to Rome. Her defiance becomes legendary, a symbol of resistance against the Borgia tide. Cesare's methods are a blend of ruthless efficiency and calculated psychological warfare. He understands that fear can be as potent a weapon as any cannon. Before attacking a town, he often ensures that tales of his army's strength and his own implacability precede him. He makes examples of those who resist too fiercely, yet he can also show clemency to those who submit quickly, ensuring a degree of stability in the lands he conquers. He is building not just an army, but a reputation. Some historians suggest his cruelty was exaggerated by his enemies, while others point to specific instances as evidence of a genuinely brutal nature. The extent to which Cesare's military successes were due to his own strategic genius versus the overwhelming French support he initially received is a matter that continues to fuel historical discussion. Certainly, the French troops were crucial in the early stages, but Cesare quickly proved he was more than just a well-connected duke. After Forlì, the campaign continues. Pesaro, ruled by Giovanni Sforza, Lucrezia Borgia's divorced first husband, which must have added a certain personal spice to the conquest for Cesare, falls without much of a fight. Rimini, under Pandolfo Malatesta, also succumbs. Cesare's advance seems unstoppable. He is creating his state, piece by piece. He is meticulous in organizing the administration of the conquered territories, often bringing in competent officials to ensure loyalty and efficient governance. He understands that holding territory requires more than just winning battles. One of the most challenging sieges is that of Faenza, defended by the young Astore III Manfredi. The city holds out bravely for months through the winter of 1500–1501. The loyalty of the Fientines to their young lord is remarkable, but Cesare's determination and his superior resources eventually prevail. Faenza capitulates in April 1501. Astore Manfredi is initially promised his life and freedom, but he is later taken to Rome and, along with his brother, meets a mysterious and tragic end in the Castel Sant'Angelo. This particular episode does much to cement Cesare's reputation for treachery and ruthlessness, a dark stain on his burgeoning ducal coronet. By now, Cesare Borgia, Duke of Valentinois and Romagna, is one of the most feared and talked about men in Italy. His military successes are undeniable. He has forged a disciplined and effective army, loyal to him personally. He attracts talented soldiers and engineers to his service, including, for a time, Leonardo da Vinci, who serves as his chief military architect and engineer, inspecting fortresses and designing war machines. Imagine Leonardo, his mind teeming with inventions, observing Cesare's campaigns, perhaps sketching a new type of cannon or a more efficient siege engine in his notebook, the glow of a campfire illuminating his work. It is also during this period that another keen observer, Niccolo Machiavelli, encounters Cesare. Machiavelli, a Florentine diplomat, is sent on missions to Cesare's camp and is deeply impressed by the Duke's intelligence, his decisiveness, his ability to command loyalty and instill fear, and his sheer ambition. Cesare's actions, his statecraft, his willingness to use any means necessary to achieve his ends, will later become a key inspiration for Machiavelli's famous treatise, The Prince. You can picture Machiavelli, a slight, observant figure in a dark cloak, watching Cesare's every move, listening to his pronouncements, analyzing his successes and failures with a cool, dispassionate eye. He saw in Cesare a man who understood the brutal realities of power. Cesare's idea of a lengthy siege was probably anything that took longer than a long weekend. He wasn't exactly known for his patience with insubordination or incompetence. The Romagna is largely pacified, or at least cowed into submission. Cesare has achieved what many thought impossible. He has taken a fragmented region of rebellious city-states and molded it into a coherent duchy. The moonlit banners of the Borgia bull fly over towns and fortresses where local tyrants once reigned supreme. The distant sounds of his camp at night, the murmur of soldiers' voices, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the occasional neigh of a horse, are the sounds of a new power consolidating its grip. The warlord of Romagna has arrived, and Italy will never be the same. His scarlet cardinal days seem a distant, almost dreamlike memory. overshadowed by the glint of his sword and the ever-expanding shadow of his ambition. While Cesare wields the sword in the moonlit fields of Romagna, carving out a state with ruthless precision, your attention is drawn back to the opulent, yet often perilous, heart of Borgia. Power Rome. Here, in the lamplit chambers of the Vatican or the luxurious palazzi of the city. Another Borgia plays a crucial, if very different, role in the family's grand design. You see Lucrezia, Pope Alexander's cherished daughter, a figure of renowned beauty and charm, moving through a world of gilded cages, strategic vows, and ever-present, insidious whispers. Her golden hair and captivating smile are spoken of throughout Italy, but behind the facade of the dutiful daughter and the celebrated hostess, you sense the delicate dance of survival in a family where personal desires are often sacrificed on the altar of dynastic ambition. While Cesare was the fist, Lucrezia was often the velvet glove, a different kind of Borgia instrument, deployed in the high-stakes orchestra of political maneuvering. Born in 1480, Lucrezia was raised in the shadow of her father's rising influence. She received an education befitting a young woman of high station, learning languages, music, and the courtly graces. She was, by all contemporary accounts, intelligent, vivacious, and possessed of an undeniable allure. Imagine her in a richly decorated room, the soft glow of candles reflecting in her eyes, the air scented with expensive perfumes, the rustle of her silk gowns as she moves, the murmur of admiring voices around her. She is the jewel of the Borgia family, a valuable asset in the intricate game of alliances. Her life becomes a tapestry woven with political marriages, each one designed to further the Borgia interests. Her first significant betrothal and marriage, at the tender age of 13 in 1493, is to Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro. He is a member of the powerful Sforza clan of Milan, and the alliance is meant to secure crucial northern support for the newly elected Pope Alexander VI. You can picture the lavish wedding festivities, the public display of unity, but the political winds of Italy are notoriously fickle. When the Borgias later shift their allegiance towards Naples and then France, Giovanni Sforza becomes not an asset, but an inconvenient tie. The marriage, which was likely never a particularly warm one, is summarily annulled in 1497. The official grounds Sforza's alleged impotence, a publicly humiliating claim that he vehemently denied. Getting a Borgia-era papal annulment, especially when your father-in-law was Pope Alexander VI, was probably quicker than waiting for a chariot during rush hour on the Appian Way. Sforza, enraged and embittered, strikes back in the only way he can with slander. He is one of the primary sources for the darkest rumors that will forever cling to Lucrezia's name. Hideous accusations of incestuous relationships with her own father and her brother Cesare. These whispers, once unleashed, take on a life of their own. The rumor mill in Rome concerning Lucrezia was so overactive, it probably needed its own dedicated papal bull just to keep up with the sheer volume of scandalous output. They are amplified by the Borgia's many political enemies, who are all too eager to paint the Spanish upstarts in the most demonic colors imaginable. Whether there was any factual basis for these shocking claims is something historians have debated for centuries, with most modern scholars concluding they were largely malicious propaganda, a common tool in the no-holds-barred political environment of Renaissance Italy. Yet, the stain of these accusations proves incredibly difficult to wash away. Lucrezia herself, still a teenager, is largely a pawn in these dynastic chess games. Her feelings, her desires, seem to be of little consequence to her father and ambitious brother. Shortly after the Sforza annulment, a new match is arranged. This time, it seems, there might have been a genuine spark of affection. In 1498, Lucrezia marries Alfonso of Aragon, the handsome young Duke of Bisceglie, an illegitimate son of the King of Naples. This alliance signals a Borgia tilt towards Naples. For a brief period, Lucrezia appears to find some happiness. You might imagine her in the gardens of her Roman palace on a warm evening, the scent of jasmine in the air, perhaps sharing a quiet moment with her young husband, a fleeting illusion of normalcy. They have a son, Rodrigo, named for her father. But idyllic moments are rare and fragile in the world of the Borgias. Political tides shift again. Cesare, now Il Valentino and firmly allied with France, sees Neapolitan connections as a liability. Alfonso of Aragon, sensing the danger, flees Rome, but is eventually persuaded to return, perhaps by Lucrezia herself. The end is tragic and brutal. In the summer of 1500, Alfonso is attacked and severely wounded on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica by unknown assailants. He is carried into the Vatican, and Lucrezia nurses him devotedly. But his enemies are not finished. One evening, while he is recovering, armed men burst into his chamber and complete the deadly work. Contemporary accounts strongly suggest that Cesare orchestrated the murder, viewing Alfonso as a political obstacle to his French-backed ambitions in the Romagna and beyond. The official story put out by the Borgias was, of course, far less incriminating, blaming leftover feuds or unknown assailants. Lucrezia is said to have been devastated by Alfonso's murder, plunged into deep grief and perhaps a growing fear of the ruthless machinations surrounding her. Her world of gilded cages suddenly feels very cold and very dangerous. Being married into the Borgia family, if you weren't a Borgia yourself, sometimes came with an unexpectedly short warranty period for the husbands. The question of Lucrezia's own awareness or complicity in such events is a complex one. The extent of Lucrezia's actual involvement or complicity in the political machinations and alleged crimes of her father and brother versus her role as a largely passive instrument of their ambitions remains a subject of fervent historical contention. Most portrayals lean towards her being a victim of circumstance, used by her family, though some suggest she was more aware and perhaps even more involved than the traditional narrative allows. Despite being used as a marital pawn, Lucrezia is not entirely without her own capabilities. There are periods where she is entrusted with significant responsibilities. In 1499, before her marriage to Alfonso of Aragon, her father appointed her governor of Spoleto, a not insignificant town in the Papal States. This is a historical fact that shows Alexander had some faith in her administrative talents. Later, after Alfonso's death, she would also briefly govern Sermoneta. You can picture her in these roles, perhaps surprising stern-faced officials with her intelligence and grasp of affairs. A young woman stepping, however briefly, out of the shadow of her male relatives and into a position of personal authority. The lamplight in her study in Spoleto might have illuminated her poring over official documents, a far cry from the frivolities of Roman court life. Yet, her primary value to her father and brother remains her marriageability. After a suitable period of mourning for Alfonso, and once the political landscape has shifted yet again, a third, and arguably most successful. Marriage is arranged for Lucrezia. This time, it is to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the powerful Duchy of Ferrara. This alliance is strategically vital for the Borgias, securing a powerful ally in northern Italy and lending an air of legitimacy and old nobility to their relatively new dynasty. The Este family is initially highly resistant to the match, repulsed by the Borgia reputation and the rumors swirling around Lucrezia. It takes immense diplomatic pressure from Pope Alexander and a very substantial dowry to seal the deal. In early 1502, Lucrezia leaves Rome for Ferrara, a lavish procession marking her journey. It's a departure that signifies a new chapter in her life, one that will ultimately see her transform her image from that of a notorious papal daughter to a respected Renaissance duchess. As she travels north, leaving the city of whispers and shadows behind, you wonder what she truly feels. Relief, trepidation, a glimmer of hope for a more stable future. The gilded cages of Rome, with their intricate locks of politics and scandal, are perhaps receding, but the memories and the reputation forged within them will follow her always, like a persistent, unshakable shadow in the otherwise bright Italian sun. The moon hangs like a silver coin over the domes of Rome, and within the vast, labyrinthine apostolic palace, the heart of Christendom beats with a rhythm all its own. You drift through its corridors, a silent observer of the Vatican's velvet nights under Pope Alexander VI. It's a world of breathtaking beauty and profound piety, yet one where earthly power, dazzling luxury, and shadowy intrigue are never far from the surface. The very walls, adorned with fresh, vibrant frescoes, seem to absorb the solemn prayers of the daytime and the hushed, often perilous, plots of the night, the scent of beeswax candles, heavy incense from a nearby chapel, and perhaps the subtle fragrance of expensive perfumes worn by courtiers and guests, all mingle in the cool night air that circulates through the grand halls and private chambers. Your footsteps echo softly on polished marble floors as you explore this domain. Pope Alexander VI, a man of sophisticated taste and a keen appreciation for the arts, has transformed parts of the Vatican into a showcase of Renaissance splendor. A significant historical fact is that he commissioned the artist Pinturicchio to decorate a suite of personal rooms, now famously known as the Borgia apartments. Imagine yourself stepping into these chambers, lit by flickering candelabra. The walls and ceilings explode with vibrant color and intricate detail. Mythological scenes, biblical narratives, and portraits of the Borgia family themselves, often cleverly integrated into religious allegories, cover every surface. Isis, Osiris, the martyrdom of saints, the liberal arts. It's a dazzling display of learning and artistic skill, designed to project an image of a cultured and powerful papacy. In one room, you might even see Lucrezia depicted as Saint Catherine, a subtle nod to the family's presence within these sacred narratives. The official life of the Pope is one of continuous ceremony and ritual. You witness magnificent liturgical services in St. Peter's Basilica or the Sistine Chapel, the air filled with the soaring notes of polyphonic choir music, perhaps compositions by Josquin des Prez, one of the greatest composers of the era, who spent time in Rome and was admired by the Borgias. The sheer opulence of these events is astounding, with cardinals in their crimson, bishops in their purple, and the Pope himself arrayed in jewel-encrusted vestments, presiding with imposing dignity. Then there are the grand banquets and receptions held for visiting dignitaries, ambassadors, and favored nobles. Long tables groan under the weight of elaborate dishes, roasted peacocks with their plumage reattached, intricate sugar sculptures, and endless courses of spiced meats and delicate pastries. Wine, often rich and potent, flows freely. The conversation is a symphony of languages, a blend of ecclesiastical pronouncements, political maneuvering, and courtly pleasantries. Alexander is a consummate host, charming and engaging, but his dark eyes miss nothing. One minute it's solemn high mass, the next it's, well, let's just say the Vatican's official event schedule under the Borgias was impressively varied and catered to a wide range of, shall we say, spiritual and temporal needs. Amidst this splendor, the daily business of the papacy grinds on. Even late into the night, you might see lights burning in the chanceries and secretariats. Couriers come and go, bearing dispatches from across Europe. Ambassadors wait for audiences. Petitions are read, bulls are drafted, and the complex administration of the universal church continues. Alexander, despite his worldly pursuits, is a diligent administrator, drawing on his decades of experience as vice-chancellor. He understands the levers of power and the importance of maintaining the church's vast organizational structure. He even took an interest in new discoveries. It's recorded that Nicholas Copernicus, the astronomer who would later propose a heliocentric universe, was in Rome around the Jubilee year of 1500 lecturing and making observations, and it's quite plausible he moved within circles known to the papal court. Yet, it is the unofficial life, the whispers of what happens behind the closed doors of the private apartments after the formal ceremonies have ended, that truly fuels the legend of the Borgia Vatican. The nights are alive not just with prayer and paperwork, but with music, dancing, and entertainments that push the boundaries of papal decorum. Alexander's own family is a constant presence, Vanozza de Catane, the mother of his most famous children, while no longer his primary companion, maintains a respected position. Lucrezia, before her departure for Ferrara, is a radiant presence at court, and Cesare, when he is in Rome between his military campaigns, moves through the Vatican like a charismatic predator, his influence palpable. And then there are the darker rumors, the tales of debauchery and scandal that cling to Alexander's papacy like tenacious ivy. The most infamous of these is the so-called Banquet of Chestnuts, alleged to have taken place in Cesare's apartments in the Vatican in October 1501. The details, primarily chronicled by the papal master of ceremonies, Johann Burchard, in his diary, are lurid and shocking, involving courtesans, suggestive contests, and the Pope himself supposedly in attendance. The reliability and potential exaggeration within Johann Burchard's diary, particularly concerning these more scandalous entries about Borgia court life, is a perennial point of scrutiny for those studying Alexander the Animorn's papacy. Was Burchard, a stickler for protocol, genuinely horrified and accurately reporting, or was he embellishing, perhaps even settling old scores or catering to a taste for scandalous gossip? Or was it simply that such events, even if they occurred, were not quite as wildly out of step with the more libertine elements of Renaissance high society as they might seem to our modern sensibilities, regardless of the absolute truth, which is now lost to the mists of time and obscured by layers of propaganda? The rumor itself was potent. Such stories, eagerly seized upon and disseminated by the Borgia's enemies, painted a picture of a papacy steeped in sin and corruption, a new Babylon on the Tiber. If you even received an invitation to certain types of Borgia parties, you might discreetly check if your life insurance and your reputation insurance were fully up to date before selecting your finest velvet tunic. It contributed to the growing calls for church reform and further blackened the Borgia name for centuries. The atmosphere within these velvet nights of the Vatican, then, is a complex tapestry. There is genuine piety and magnificent artistic expression. There is astute political maneuvering and the diligent administration of a global spiritual empire. But there is also an undeniable air of worldliness, of luxury bordering on decadence, and a constant undercurrent of suspicion and whispered secrets. Vatican security back then was probably less about sophisticated alarm systems and more about a network of watchful eyes, loyal retainers, and knowing precisely whose dagger was sharpest or whose tongue could deliver the most cutting report. The shadows in the torchlit courtyards and along the frescoed corridors seem deeper here, capable of concealing both quiet devotion and whispered conspiracies. It is a place where the sacred and the profane don't just coexist, but often seem to dance a dangerous, captivating waltz under the watchful, intelligent gaze of Pope Alexander VI, a pontiff who truly embodied the multifaceted, contradictory spirit of the Renaissance. The velvet nights of the Vatican, with their opulent feasts and whispered intrigues, have a darker lining. As you delve deeper into the shadows of Pope Alexander VI's reign, the methods by which the Borgia family cemented and expanded their power come into sharper, more chilling focus. It's a world where the rustle of an assassin's cloak in a dark alleyway, or the glint of something sinister in a wine cup, are not just figments of a fearful imagination, but ever-present possibilities in the minds of their contemporaries. The air itself in certain Roman circles seems thick with suspicion, every sudden illness or unexpected death scrutinized for the unseen hand of the Pope or his formidable son, Cesare. The whispers you've heard before are now coalescing into more defined, more alarming accusations. One of the most visible and historically undeniable pillars of Borgia power was nepotism. Now, let's be clear. Favoring one's relatives was hardly a Borgia invention. It was standard operating procedure for popes and princes throughout the Renaissance. It was seen as a way to build a loyal inner circle, to ensure that key positions were held by trusted individuals in a world riddled with shifting allegiances. However, Pope Alexander VI practiced it with a zeal and on a scale that drew considerable comment even at the time. A well-documented historical fact is that Alexander VI elevated numerous relatives to the cardinalate, including his own son Cesare at a very young age, and Alessandro Farnese, the brother of Giulia Farnese, who was widely known to be the Pope's beautiful mistress, beyond cardinals. Borgia kin and loyal Catalans were appointed to countless bishoprics, administrative posts, and military commands. It was a way of ensuring that the vast machinery of the Papal States and the Church's wealth increasingly served Borgia interests. The family motto might as well have been, "Keep it in the family, and if there isn't enough family, make more appointments." Then there's simony, the buying and selling of church offices. You witnessed its alleged role in the conclave that elected Alexander. But the accusations didn't stop there. Throughout his papacy, whispers persisted that cardinals' hats, bishoprics, and other lucrative positions were available to the highest bidder. Creating new cardinals, for instance, wasn't just about filling ecclesiastical roles. Each new red hat could come with substantial gifts or loans to the papal treasury, which, conveniently, was largely under Borgia control. This practice, while providing much-needed funds for Alexander's projects, including Cesare's campaigns, further eroded the Church's spiritual authority in the eyes of many and fueled the calls for reform that were growing louder across Europe. The Borgias seem to have a very effective, if ethically questionable, wealth redistribution program from the church's coffers and wealthy aspirants, directly or indirectly, towards Borgia enterprises. But perhaps no accusation is more synonymous with the Borgia name than that of poisoning. Cantarella, a legendary secret poison supposedly favored by the family, has become the stuff of dark folklore. Descriptions of it vary, sometimes a white powder, tasteless and odorless, allegedly derived from arsenic or other potent toxins, capable of inducing a slow, wasting illness or a sudden, violent death, depending on the dose. The fear of Borgia poison was pervasive. Attending a Borgia dinner party, especially if you suspected you were on their naughty list, or happened to be a wealthy cardinal in failing health, must have involved a lot of anxious glances, perhaps a discreet sniff of the wine, and a sudden preference for only eating things you'd seen the host sample first. The actual prevalence and effectiveness of poisoning as a deliberate state tool by the Borgias, as opposed to it being a wildly successful and enduring smear campaign by their numerous enemies, remains a subject of vigorous debate among historians. Concrete proof is elusive, often buried under layers of rumor and hostile testimony. Yet, certain deaths did raise suspicions, conveniently benefiting the Borgia coffers or removing political obstacles. When wealthy cardinals died, their estates often reverted to the papal treasury. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Orsini, a member of a powerful Roman family, often at odds with the Borgias, died in Castel Sant'Angelo after being imprisoned by Alexander. While the official cause was illness, many suspected foul play, especially as his death weakened the Orsini clan considerably. Similarly, the Venetian cardinal Giovanni Michiel died suddenly in 1503, and rumors immediately circulated that he had been poisoned by Cesare, so his fortune could be seized. These stories, true or not, created a potent climate of fear. The very suggestion that the Pope or his son might resort to such methods was enough to silence critics and cow potential opponents. Alongside alleged poisoning, the Borgias were accused of more straightforward methods of enriching themselves and neutralizing enemies, false accusations, imprisonment, and the confiscation of property. Wealthy individuals, particularly those whose loyalty was suspect or whose estates were coveted, might find themselves suddenly accused of treason or other serious crimes. Imprisonment, often in the grim confines of Castel Sant'Angelo, would follow. If the accused died in captivity from illness, despair, or other, less natural causes, their property could be declared forfeit and absorbed by the Borgias. This systematic acquisition of wealth was crucial for funding Cesare's expensive military campaigns and maintaining the lavish lifestyle of the papal court. Remember the chilling efficiency Cesare showed in consolidating power in the Romagna. That same pragmatic, and often brutal, approach was applied to the family's finances and the neutralization of their rivals in Rome itself. The great Roman baronial families, like the Orsini and the Colonna, who had for centuries treated the papacy as their personal plaything and Rome as their battleground, found themselves systematically targeted by the Borgias. Alexander was determined to break their power and bring the papal states under true papal, meaning Borgia, control. Cesare, with his military acumen, was the primary instrument in this. He waged war against their castles, confiscated their lands, and, when necessary, arranged for their permanent removal from the political chessboard. The Borgias' approach to conflict resolution. It was often grimly joked by those who dared to whisper, frequently involved ensuring the other party wouldn't be available for any future conflicts, permanently. You can imagine the atmosphere in Rome on certain nights. A carriage rumbles through a dark, narrow street, its passenger glancing nervously out of the window. A wealthy merchant suddenly sells his properties and flees the city. A cardinal writes his will with a trembling hand. The shadows seem to hold more than just the absence of light. They hold spies, informants, and perhaps a silent figure with a vial or a well-oiled dagger. The very air seems charged with an unspoken menace. This climate of fear, whether entirely justified by their actions or skillfully amplified by their reputation, was a powerful weapon in the Borgia arsenal. It allowed them to govern, to accumulate wealth, and to pursue their dynastic ambitions with a ruthlessness that left much of Italy both aghast and, in some quarters, grudgingly impressed by their audacity and effectiveness. The foundations of their power were built not just on alliances and armies, but on a carefully cultivated aura of danger and the ever-present suspicion that to cross the Borgias was to invite a terrible, and often secret, retribution. The Borgia bull rampaged through Italy, its horns sharp, its eyes fixed on power. But the path to dominion is never unopposed. As you navigate the Roman gloom, or peer into the flickering torchlight of distant council chambers and monastic cells, you encounter the faces of those who dared to stand against Alexander and Cesare. These are the rivals, the enemies, the defiant voices who plotted, fought, and preached against the perceived tyranny and corruption of the Spanish Pope and his formidable son. The shadows of suspicion cast by the Borgias were met, in turn, by the glaring light of open defiance or the equally shadowy counter-intrigues of those determined to see them fall. The night air of Italy, it seems, is perpetually thick with plots and counterplots, a symphony of ambition played in a minor key. Among the most formidable and consistent thorns in Alexander's side were the ancient and powerful Roman baronial families, chiefly the Orsini and the Colonna. These clans had lorded over Rome and the surrounding Campania for centuries, treating the papacy as a prize to be fought over and papal lands as their personal estates. They had their own fortresses, their own private armies, and a network of allegiances that often made them more powerful than the Pope himself within the city. The Roman barons had been feuding with each other for so long. They probably had ancestral grudges written into their family recipes. Take one rival castle, add a generous dash of treachery, stir vigorously, and let simmer for at least a century. Alexander, and particularly Cesare, were determined to break their stranglehold. This inevitably led to open conflict. The Orsini, in particular, repeatedly clashed with Cesare as he sought to consolidate papal meaning Borgia control over territories they considered their own. They formed leagues against him, hired condottieri, and engaged in bitter warfare. Cesare's response was characteristically ruthless, culminating in events like the infamous Senegalia trap in 1502, where he lured several Orsini-affiliated captains to a meeting and had them treacherously arrested and executed. It was a brutal but effective stroke that temporarily crippled their opposition. Then, there was the relentless animosity of Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, a man whose personal disdain for Rodrigo Borgia was matched only by his own towering ambition. You remember him from the conclave of 1492, a strong contender for the papacy himself. After Borgia's election, della Rovere, fearing for his safety and probably rightly so, fled Italy. A crucial historical fact is that Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere took refuge in France and actively encouraged King Charles VIII to invade Italy and depose Alexander VI on charges of simony and scandalous conduct. He accompanied Charles on his march through Italy, a constant menacing presence at the French king's side. Though the attempt to depose Alexander failed, Della Rovere remained a focal point of anti-Borgia sentiment. His animosity towards Alexander was so legendarily intense. If looks could actually inflict physical harm, the Pope would have needed a permanent, heavily armed bodyguard just for their consistory meetings, and probably an official food taster for the communion wine, just in case. Eventually, he would return to Italy and, after Alexander's death, achieve his own papal ambitions as Pope Julius II, becoming one of the most formidable popes of the Renaissance and an energetic dismantler of Borgia power. Other Italian states watched the rise of the Borgias with a mixture of fear and opportunism. The Republic of Venice, the serene and calculating maritime power, was always a cautious player. They had their own interests in the Romagna and along the Adriatic coast, which sometimes brought them into competition with Cesare's expanding duchy. Venice was like the cool-headed poker player at a table of emotional gamblers, rarely showing its hand, but always ready to capitalize on the mistakes of others. Florence, a republic deeply proud of its civic liberties, was perpetually wary of Borgia expansionism. The city was a hotbed of intrigue, its government trying to navigate a treacherous path between the ambitions of France, Milan, the papacy, and its own internal factions. It was in Florence that one of the most dramatic and vocal challenges to Pope Alexander VI arose, in the form of a gaunt, fiery Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola. From his pulpit in the convent of San Marco, Savonarola preached with apocalyptic fervor against the corruption of the age, the vanity of worldly goods, and the sins of the Church, with Pope Alexander VI as a frequent and explicit target. Imagine yourself in the crowded Duomo of Florence, the air thick with anticipation, the light filtering dimly through the stained glass windows. Savonarola's voice, raw and impassioned, echoes through the vast space, denouncing the Borgia Pope as a simoniac, a heretic, a servant of Satan. He called for repentance, for a moral purification of Florence and all of Italy. For a time, his influence was immense. He inspired the bonfire of the vanities, where Florentines burned books, artworks, luxurious clothing, and other symbols of worldly excess in public squares. His sermons were less gentle spiritual guidance for the soul and more fire and brimstone with a strict no refunds policy on eternal damnation. Not exactly the kind of easy listening you'd put on for a lazy Sunday afternoon. Pope Alexander initially tried to silence Savonarola with warnings, then with offers of a cardinal's hat, which Savonarola contemptuously refused, saying he preferred a hat of blood, meaning martyrdom. Finally, the Pope excommunicated him. The political tide in Florence also began to turn against the friar. His prophecies seemed increasingly outlandish, his political judgment flawed, and his constant calls for moral austerity began to weary a populace fond of its Renaissance pleasures. The true extent of Savonarola's popular support in Florence at the height of his influence, and whether his downfall was primarily due to papal pressure or shifting internal Florentine politics, is still a matter of some historical conjecture. In 1498, Savonarola was arrested, tried for heresy under duress and torture. He confessed, and then publicly hanged and his body burned in the Piazza della Signoria. His defiance was a dramatic and ultimately tragic episode, a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who openly challenged the power of Pope Alexander VI. Even figures who were initially allies could become rivals. Cardinal Ascanio Sforza, whose support had been crucial in securing Rodrigo Borgia's election to the papacy, found his relationship with Alexander strained as the Borgia's ambitions clashed with the interests of his Sforza relatives in Milan, particularly after the French, allied with the Pope, drove Ludovico Sforza from his ducal throne. The complex web of Italian alliances meant that yesterday's friend could easily become tomorrow's foe, especially when Cesare's appetite for territory seemed insatiable. You can almost feel the constant hum of opposition that surrounded the Borgias. In the dimly lit back rooms of Roman palazzi, disgruntled nobles and ambitious cardinals would meet, their faces obscured by shadows, their voices low as they plotted. Couriers on swift horses would carry secret messages between cities, weaving a web of anti-Borgia sentiment. The night was not just a time for Borgia revelry or Cesare's military planning. It was also a time when their enemies sharpened their daggers, both literal and metaphorical, and prayed for, or actively worked towards, the downfall of the Spanish Pope and his audacious family. Every victory for the Borgias seemed to galvanize their opponents further, creating a cycle of conflict and intrigue that defined this turbulent era. The gloom of Rome was indeed thick with rivals, each with their own agenda, each casting their own shadow in the unending dance of power. The moon, full and luminous, seems to pause directly above Rome, casting its silver light on a city, and indeed a significant swathe of Italy that lies firmly in the grip of the Borgia. You stand, metaphorically, on a high parapet of the Vatican, the night air cool and still, and survey the zenith of their power. The whispers of their early struggles and the shouts of their defiant enemies have, for this moment, largely subsided, replaced by the resounding echo of their triumphs. The Borgia bull, their family emblem, is stamped everywhere, on fortresses, on new coinage, in the very consciousness of a watching, wary Europe. Its shadow stretches long and dark, a testament to ambition realized. Remember those early days in Valencia, the scent of orange blossoms and distant dreams of ecclesiastical advancement. Now the air across much of central Italy is thick with the undeniable scent of raw Borgia power, and those once distant dreams have morphed into a startlingly tangible and formidable reality. At the forefront of this ascendancy is Cesare Borgia, Il Valentino, Duke of Romagna. By 1502, a crucial historical fact is that he had largely completed his conquest of that turbulent region, transforming a patchwork of unruly, semi-independent lordships into a centralized and, by the standards of the day, relatively well-administered state. Cities like Imola, Forlì, Faenza, Pesaro, and Rimini, once ruled by petty tyrants constantly at war with each other, now answer to one master. You might see him, not in his campaign tent under duress, but in a newly acquired ducal palace in Cesena, the heart of his new domain. Lamplight illuminates his handsome, determined face as he dictates orders to his secretaries, plans infrastructure projects, or dispenses justice. He brings in capable administrators, some from outside the Romagna to ensure loyalty, and institutes reforms aimed at fostering stability and commerce. For the common people of the Romagna, long suffering under the capricious rule of their former lords, Cesare's firm, if often brutal, hand sometimes brings a measure of peace and order they haven't known for generations. He even establishes a new court of justice to handle disputes fairly. The Borgias weren't just aiming for a footnote in the history books, they were aiming for the whole darn trilogy, complete with prequels, sequels, and maybe even a spin-off series for their most successful generals. This new Duchy of Romagna is Cesare's power base, a state carved out by his own skill and his father's unwavering support. It provides him with revenue, soldiers, and a platform for even greater ambitions. Whispers now speak of him eyeing Bologna, perhaps even Florence and Siena, as he seeks to expand his territories and create a truly dominant Borgia kingdom in central Italy. His army is one of the most effective in Italy, a mix of loyal Italian captains, Swiss pikemen, French lancers, and Spanish infantry, all disciplined and devoted to their charismatic duke. Machiavelli, observing him during this period, sees in Cesare the embodiment of the new prince, a ruler who understands that power rests on force and cunning, and who is unafraid to use whatever means necessary to achieve his ends. The question of whether Cesare Borgia's state in the Romagna could have achieved long-term stability and legitimacy had he and his father remained in power longer is a fascinating, counterfactual point frequently explored by historians. Meanwhile, Lucrezia Borgia, once a pawn in the turbulent game of Roman politics, is now a duchess in her own right, presiding over one of Italy's most cultured courts. Her marriage in 1502 to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara, is a masterstroke of Borgia diplomacy. Ferrara is a powerful and respected state in northern Italy, and the alliance lends the Borgias a sheen of legitimacy and old-world aristocratic acceptance that they previously lacked. You can imagine Lucrezia, now in her early 20s, gracing the Este castle, the Castello Estense, with its imposing towers and moat, a far cry from the intrigue-laden halls of the Vatican. The night might find her presiding over a literary salon, listening to poets recite their verses, or watching a theatrical performance. The torchlight softening her famous golden hair, she begins to cultivate an image as a patron of the arts and a pious and devoted wife, gradually distancing herself from the scandalous reputation that had preceded her. Her success in Ferrara is a crucial diplomatic asset for her father and brother. Back in Rome, Pope Alexander VI is at the height of his temporal authority. The once rebellious Roman barons, the Orsini and Colonna, have been largely crushed or cowed into submission by Cesare's campaigns and Alexander's relentless pressure. Their castles are seized, their lands confiscated, their leaders exiled or eliminated. Rome is quiet, under firm Borgia control. At this point, if a stray cat meowed too loudly near the Vatican, it was probably suspected of being a highly trained operative for a rival family, or at the very least, not meowing with sufficient pro-Borgia enthusiasm. The College of Cardinals, once a forum for potential opposition, is now packed with Spanish relatives and loyal Italian appointees who owe their red hats, and thus their allegiance to Alexander. His control over the church's administrative and financial machinery is absolute. The Borgia coffers are overflowing. Wealth pours in from the traditional revenues of the Papal States, from the sale of offices, from the Jubilee year of 1500 which brought hordes of pilgrims and their money to Rome, and from the confiscated estates of their fallen enemies. The Borgia family vault, wherever it was discreetly located, probably needed its own dedicated postal code and a very understanding dragon as its chief security officer. This immense wealth funds Cesare's armies, pays for Alexander's lavish court and artistic patronage, and finances their complex international diplomacy. Internationally, the Borgias are a force to be reckoned with. Their primary alliance is with France, whose King Louis XIV relies on papal support for his own Italian ambitions. This alliance provides Cesare with crucial French military aid and protects the Borgias from some of their Italian enemies. Spain, under Ferdinand and Isabella, while sometimes wary of Borgia power, is also a key player, and Alexander, as a Spaniard, often seeks to maintain good relations. Other powers might despise them, fear them, or condemn their methods, but they cannot ignore them. Ambassadors from across Europe tread the path to the Vatican, seeking audiences, negotiating treaties, or simply trying to gauge the intentions of this formidable pope and his even more formidable son. There's a palpable sense that a Borgia dynasty is not just a fleeting ambition, but a rapidly solidifying reality. The pope is aging, but Cesare is young, vigorous, and seemingly unstoppable. Their plans are rumored to be vast. With Romagna secured, Tuscany seems the next logical target. Perhaps then, a kingdom of central Italy, ruled by Cesare, buttressed by papal authority, dominating the peninsula. For a few short years, it seems as though nothing can stand in their way. The Borgia bull is not just an emblem, it's a symbol of raw, untamed power that has gored its way to the very summit of Renaissance Italy. The moonlit vistas from the Vatican walls stretch over a landscape increasingly shaped by their will, a world where the name Borgia inspires a potent mixture of terror, awe, and grudging admiration. The Borgia bull stands magnificent at its zenith, its shadow long and seemingly unshakable under the Italian moon. Cesare's armies are disciplined, his duchy organized. Lucrezia is secure in Ferrara. Alexander VI, though aging, still commands the Vatican with an iron will and a wily intellect. Their dynasty feels inevitable, their power absolute. But fortune, that capricious goddess so often invoked in the Renaissance, is a notorious trickster, delighting in the unpredictable. She builds men up to dizzying heights. It often seems only to derive a perverse satisfaction from the spectacle of their sudden, dramatic fall. And as the stifling, fever-laden heat of a Roman August descends in the year 1503, you feel a subtle, ominous shift in the night air, a change in the rhythm of the city's nocturnal heartbeat. Fortune's flame, which had burned so incandescently for the Borgias, is about to flicker violently, threatening to plunge their ambitions into darkness. The city of Rome in August is a sweltering, unhealthy place. The Pontine marshes to the south exhale miasmic vapors, and the air hangs heavy and humid, particularly at night. Malaria, the Roman fever, is a constant, lurking menace, felling prince and pauper alike with indiscriminate impartiality. Rome in August could be a real killer, even without any alleged poison plots needing to be factored in. The mosquitoes alone were probably well organized, highly motivated, and auditioning for roles as tiny, blood-sucking assassins in some grand, unseen opera of suffering. It is against this backdrop of oppressive summer heat and endemic disease that the fateful events unfold. In early August, Pope Alexander VI and his son, Cesare Borgia, attend a supper. Or perhaps it was a vineyard outing, hosted by Cardinal Adriano Castellesi at his villa outside the city. Both father and son, along with other guests, subsequently fall violently ill. The symptoms are alarming: high fever, vomiting, prostration. Almost immediately, the whispers begin, as they always do in Rome when prominent figures sicken suddenly. Poison. The word flies through the city's shadowy alleyways and across its moonlit piazzas. Given the Borgias' own notorious reputation, it's an accusation that finds fertile ground. Had an enemy finally succeeded in turning their own favored weapon against them? Had Cardinal Castellesi, perhaps fearing he was next on the Borgia list for confiscation or elimination, taken a desperate preemptive strike? Or, in a darkly ironic twist, had the Borgias intended to poison their host, only for some dreadful mistake to occur, leading them to consume the tainted dish or wine themselves? The family accused of so many calculated poisonings now faced the terrifying randomness of illness, or perhaps a poison they hadn't personally administered. The precise cause of Alexander II's and Cesare Borgia's sudden and severe illness in August 1503, whether it was Roman summer malaria, striking with unusual virulence, an accidental or intentional poisoning, or another virulent fever entirely, remains one of the most hotly debated medical mysteries of the Renaissance. Modern medical historians, weighing the contemporary descriptions of the symptoms, the fevers, the fluxes, the relatively rapid progression in Alexander's case, often lean towards a diagnosis of a severe form of malaria, possibly complicated by other infections common in the unsanitary conditions of the time. Cesare, younger and stronger, had a better chance of fighting it off. However, the allure of a poison plot, so fitting with the Borgia narrative, has never entirely faded from historical accounts. Pope Alexander VI, now in his early 70s, declines rapidly. You can imagine the scene within the apostolic palace, the hushed, anxious activity, physicians conferring in low tones, their faces grim in the flickering lamplight. Priests offer prayers, servants hurry to and fro with cool compresses and draughts of medicine that offer little relief. The Pope's once robust constitution gives way. His breathing becomes labored, his skin clammy with feverish sweat. Outside the Vatican walls, the city holds its breath. News of the Pope's grave illness spreads, and with it, a sense of impending chaos. His enemies, long suppressed, begin to stir in the shadows. On August 18, 1503, after nearly 2 weeks of suffering, Pope Alexander VI dies. The news, when it finally breaks, sends shockwaves through Rome and across Italy. The man who had dominated the Italian political landscape for over a decade, the architect of Borgia power, is gone. The immediate aftermath is one of turmoil. According to contemporary accounts, including the ever-present diary of Johann Burchard, the Pope's body decomposed with shocking rapidity in the August heat, turning black and bloated. This, of course, further fueled the rumors of a particularly potent poison. When news of Alexander's death hit the streets, Rome basically threw a citywide, everything must go sale at the Vatican, with a distinct lack of checkout counters or security guards. Servants and hangers-on reportedly looted the papal apartments, stripping them bare of valuables before the Pope's body was even cold. The authority of the Borgia regime seems to evaporate overnight. Crucially, at this most critical juncture, Cesare Borgia is himself gravely ill, fighting for his life. He is prostrate with fever, his formidable energy sapped, his keen mind clouded by sickness. He, who had always been the man of action, the swift decider, is now utterly incapacitated. He is unable to ride out and command his troops, unable to intimidate his enemies, unable to influence the tense political maneuvering that immediately begins for the election of a new pope. Cesare picked the worst possible time to be bedridden. It's like the universe's most ironic out-of-office notification, popping up with flashing red lights just as his entire hard-won empire was teetering on the brink of collapse. The French and Spanish factions within the College of Cardinals begin their machinations, and the Roman barons, seeing their chance, start to reassert themselves. The carefully constructed Borgia state in the Romagna, so dependent on Cesare's personal authority and the Pope's backing, begins to unravel almost instantly. Cities that had been cowed into submission now sense a power vacuum. former lords or their heirs, see an opportunity to reclaim their lost territories. Venice eyes coveted Romagnol towns. The enemies of the Borgias, both within Rome and across Italy, who had been forced into silence or exile, begin to emerge from the woodwork, eager for revenge and restitution. Fortune's flame, indeed, has not just flickered, but has been violently doused for Pope Alexander VI. For Cesare, it burns perilously low, his life hanging in the balance. The zenith of Borgia power, so recently achieved, so seemingly secure, proves to be tragically ephemeral. The entire edifice of their ambition, built with such ruthlessness, cunning, and expense of blood and treasure, now rests on the recovery of one sick man, whose own future is shrouded in the deepest uncertainty. The moonlit night over Rome is no longer a scene of Borgia triumph, but one of profound crisis, the city alive with fear, opportunism, and the ghostly echo of a dynasty's sudden, shocking decline. The bull, it seems, has been grievously wounded. The fever that nearly claimed Cesare Borgia's life finally breaks. But as he emerges, weak and shaken, from its grip, the world he knew has been irrevocably altered. The night is no longer his to command. His father, Pope Alexander VI, is dead. The Vatican, once the seat of his family's immense power, is now a hive of intrigue, buzzing with the selection of a new pontiff. You see Cesare, a shadow of his former formidable self, desperately trying to cling to the remnants of his authority, a fading star against a sky rapidly filling with his enemies' constellations, the man who made Italy tremble, who carved out a duchy with swift efficiency, now finds himself struggling to even command a handful of loyal soldiers, the ground crumbling beneath his feet with every passing hour. His physical recovery is slow, and during those crucial weeks of incapacitation, his enemies have moved swiftly. The carefully constructed Duchy of Romagna is in open revolt. Cities eagerly throw off Borgia rule and welcome back their former lords, or assert their independence. Venice quickly seizes several Romagnol territories. Cesare, still possessing a corps of loyal troops and some fortresses, tries to salvage the situation. He attempts to influence the papal conclave of September 1503, hoping for a friendly pope. The result is Pius III, an aged and infirm Piccolomini, who reigns for a mere 26 days before dying. It's a brief respite, nothing more. The next conclave, in October 1503, is a disaster for Cesare. His old nemesis, Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, the man who had dedicated years to opposing the Borgias, is elected pope, taking the name Julius II. If Cesare had a list of worst possible outcomes, this would have been highlighted, circled, and probably set on fire for emphasis. Pope Julius II had a to-do list, and right at the top, in big, bold letters, was "Dismantle everything Borgia." He probably had a special gold-plated quill just for enthusiastically checking off those particular items. Julius is determined, energetic, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of re-establishing direct papal control over church territories. Starting with Cesare's Romagna, Julius II skillfully outmaneuvers Cesare. He demands the return of Romagnol fortresses, still held by Borgia loyalists, promising Cesare continued papal favor in exchange. Cesare, his options dwindling, his French allies becoming lukewarm, and his coffers nearly empty, is forced to comply with some of these demands. He still hopes to retain some foothold, some vestige of his power. But Julius has no intention of allowing a Borgia duke to remain a power in central Italy. One by one, Cesare's captains are pressured or bought off. His towns surrender. The Panther, as some once called him for his swift and deadly movements, is now being systematically caged. His international support evaporates. France, under Louis XVIII, is more concerned with its own interests in Naples and Milan than with propping up a now weakened Cesare. Spain, initially appearing to offer some support, proves duplicitous. In 1504, lured to Naples under a safe conduct from the Spanish commander, Gonzalo Fernandez de Cordoba, known as the Great Captain, Cesare is betrayed. Despite Cordoba's promises, Cesare is arrested on the orders of King Ferdinand of Aragon, who sees the unpredictable Valentino as a destabilizing influence. The man who had once held kings and popes in careful negotiation now finds himself a prisoner, his fate dictated by others. He is shipped to Spain, a land his ancestors had left generations before to seek their fortune. He is imprisoned in several fortresses, most famously in the high, forbidding tower of the castle of La Mota in Medina del Campo. Imagine him there, in a cold, stone cell, the wind whistling through the arrow slits, a stark contrast to the sun-drenched battlefields of Romagna or the velvet chambers of the Vatican. The man who had commanded thousands, who had dined with kings and popes, now faces the monotony of imprisonment, the taste of stale bread and water, and the bitter knowledge of his fall. The nights must have been endless, filled with the ghosts of his triumphs and the gnawing awareness of his enemies' satisfaction. But Cesare Borgia is not a man to succumb easily to despair. His spirit, though battered, remains unbroken. In October 1506, after nearly 2 years of captivity, he stages a daring and legendary escape from the castle of La Mota. With the help of a few loyal supporters on the outside and an accomplice within, he uses a rope made of knotted tapestries or bed sheets to descend from the high tower under the cover of a stormy night. The rope is too short. He has to jump the remaining distance, injuring himself in the process. But he is free. Cesare's escape from that tower was so audacious. It makes you wonder if he'd been taking extreme rope climbing for ambitious fugitives and dramatic nighttime evasion classes in his spare time. He manages to evade his pursuers and make his way to Navarre in northern Spain. Navarre is ruled by his brother-in-law, King John III, Jean d'Albret, husband of his sister Charlotte. Here, Cesare hopes to find refuge and perhaps a new opportunity to rebuild his fortunes. He is welcomed and offered a position as a military commander in the King of Navarre's service, who is engaged in a conflict to recover castles lost to a rebellious count. For a brief while, Cesare is once again a soldier, wearing armor, leading men into battle. It's a far cry from the vast power he once wielded, but it is a return to the life of action he craved. His final stand comes in March 1507 during the siege of the castle of Viana. On a cold, stormy night, leading a small force, Cesare charges into an ambush set by the count's men. He fights with his customary bravery, but he is outnumbered and overwhelmed. A mainstream historical fact is that Cesare Borgia died on March 12, 1507, struck down in this obscure skirmish. He was just 31 years old. His body, stripped of its armor and valuables by the enemy, is found the next day. The once feared Duke of Valentinois and Romagna, the man who had been a byword for brilliance and ruthlessness, meets his end not in a grand Italian palace or on a major European battlefield, but in a minor engagement in a remote corner of Spain. Even at the very end, fighting someone else's battle, Cesare probably still had better battlefield style and more sheer audacity than most of the other combatants. He never did anything by halves, did he? Cesare Borgia's fall was as dramatic and swift as his rise. Historians continue to analyze whether his ultimate failure was primarily due to the loss of papal backing with his father's death, the concerted and relentless efforts of his numerous and powerful enemies like Julius II, or perhaps inherent flaws in his own long-term strategy and an over-reliance on the fickle whims of fortune. What remains undeniable is his extraordinary impact on his contemporaries and on the imagination of posterity. The fading star had finally been extinguished, leaving behind a legacy of both terror and brilliance, a cautionary tale of ambition's dizzying heights and devastating falls, played out under the ever-watchful, often unforgiving, Italian and Spanish night skies, while Cesare's star blazes briefly and then tragically extinguishes itself against the harsh backdrop of Spanish battlements. Another Borgia, his sister Lucrezia, embarks on a different, longer, and ultimately transformative journey. You leave behind the desperate struggles and shadowed prisons of Cesare's final years and travel north, towards the elegant, moated city of Ferrara. Here, under a softer, more scholarly moon, Lucrezia steps out of the long, dark shadow of her Roman past and into the flickering, refined light of a Renaissance court. The whispers from Rome still echo, certainly, their insidious tendrils long and difficult to sever completely. But in Ferrara, Lucrezia begins to compose her own, more harmonious, and surprisingly resilient, melody. Her arrival in Ferrara in 1502 as the bride of Alfonso d'Este, heir to the duchy, is met with considerable apprehension. The Este family, one of Italy's oldest and most distinguished noble houses, had been deeply reluctant to ally themselves with the notorious Borgias. Lucrezia's reputation, burdened by the scandalous rumors of incest, poison, and political machinations orchestrated by her father and brother, precedes her like a dark cloud. You can imagine the sideways glances, the hushed conversations behind elegant fans, the cool formality of her reception in the magnificent Castello Estense, winning over the proud Ferrarese court and her new, somewhat stern husband, Alfonso, who would become duke in 1505, would require more than just charm. It would demand immense diplomacy, patience, and a carefully crafted persona. It was a task akin to convincing a room full of skeptical art critics that your finger painting was, in fact, a lost masterpiece. It probably required more genuine effort and grace than a whole delegation of seasoned diplomats armed with a lifetime supply of really good Italian pastries. Yet, Lucrezia, now in her early 20s, rises to the challenge. She is, after all, a Borgia, intelligent, adaptable, and possessed of a keen understanding of courtly dynamics. She gradually sheds the image of the scandalous papal daughter and cultivates that of a serene, cultured, and pious duchess. The gilded cage of Rome, with its constant political terrors and moral ambiguities, is exchanged for a different kind of environment, one where she has more agency to shape her own role, albeit still within the constraints of a Renaissance noblewoman's life. A significant and well-documented historical fact is that Lucrezia Borgia, as Duchess of Ferrara, became an important patron of the arts and letters. She fosters a vibrant cultural atmosphere, attracting some of the brightest literary and artistic talents of the age to the Ferrarese court, Imagine her in her private apartments, perhaps on a quiet evening. The windows open to a cool breeze carrying the scent of the castle gardens. Lamplight illuminates the faces of poets like Ludovico Ariosto, who would include flattering verses about her in his epic Orlando Furioso, and Pietro Bembo, the scholar and poet who for a time cherished a deep, albeit probably platonic, affection for her. Their correspondence reveals a woman of intellect and sensitivity. Musicians, painters, and scholars all find a welcoming reception and support from the Duchess. Her evening gatherings in Ferrara were likely a bit more highbrow and considerably less controversial than the alleged banquet of chestnuts back in Rome. More poetry recitals and philosophical discussions, fewer unexpected theatrical performances involving airborne chestnuts. Ferrara, under her influence and that of the Este Dukes, flourishes as a beacon of Renaissance culture. Beyond her cultural patronage, Lucrezia dedicates herself to charitable works and displays a growing piety in her later years. She founds convents and hospitals, concerns herself with the welfare of the poor, and engages in personal acts of devotion. After the whirlwind of her youth, the betrayals, the losses, and the constant undercurrent of danger in Rome, her later piety might have been her way of seeking solace, of finding a different kind of meaning, perhaps even a quiet, personal form of atonement. It was as if she was saying, "All right, universe, I believe I've had my lifetime quota of high drama and existential peril. Thank you very much. How about we try some quiet contemplation and good works for a change?" The degree to which Lucrezia Borgia's transformation in Ferrara represented a genuine personal evolution, a deeply felt spiritual awakening, versus a carefully constructed public image designed to overcome her past notoriety and secure her position, is something that continues to intrigue historical biographers and fuel gentle debate in academic circles. It was likely a complex blend of both. Her relationship with her husband, Duke Alfonso d'Este, seems to have evolved from a purely political arrangement into one of mutual respect and perhaps even a quiet, undemonstrative affection. Alfonso was a stern, somewhat martial figure, more interested in artillery and warfare than in poetry and art. But he seems to have recognized Lucrezia's intelligence and capabilities. She bore him several children, including 3 sons who would succeed to the ducal throne, thus ensuring the continuation of the Este dynasty, a primary duty for any Renaissance duchess. This domestic stability and her role as a mother further solidified her position and her more matronly, respectable image. Life in Ferrara is not entirely an escape from the turbulent politics of Italy. The Italian wars continue to rage, and Ferrara, strategically located, is often caught in the crossfire. Alfonso frequently finds himself at odds with powerful figures, including Lucrezia's own former family nemesis, Pope Julius II, who is determined to curb Ferrarese power. During her husband's absences for military campaigns, Lucrezia sometimes acts as regent, managing the affairs of the duchy with competence and a firm hand, demonstrating political acumen that perhaps she had learned during those earlier, brief governorships her father had entrusted to her. Her letters from this period reveal her concerns for her husband, her children, and her state, painting a picture of a capable woman navigating treacherous political waters. The news of her brother Cesare's death in 1507 must have reached her in Ferrara, a somber reminder of the violent world she had largely left behind, and perhaps a source of complex, private grief. Her father, Alexander VI, was long gone. She was, In many ways, the last prominent Borgia on the Italian stage, Lucrezia Borgia, Duchess of Ferrara, dies relatively young, at the age of 39, in June 1519 following complications from childbirth. By the time of her death, she has largely succeeded in rehabilitating her image, at least within Ferrara. She is mourned by her husband and her subjects not as the infamous daughter of a scandalous pope, but as a respected and beloved duchess, a patron of culture, a mother, and a woman of piety. The dark whispers of her Roman youth never entirely vanished from the broader historical narrative. But in Ferrara, Lucrezia found a different kind of light, a more enduring legacy built on her own terms, in the elegant, moon-drenched courtyards and learned halls of her adopted city. Her journey from a political pawn in Rome to a revered figure in Ferrara is a testament to her resilience, her intelligence, and her remarkable capacity for transformation. The moon, a silent witness to centuries of human drama, now casts its gentle glow upon the scattered stones and faded parchments that hold the echoes of the Borgia story. Their tumultuous lives, filled with dazzling power and dark intrigue, have long since ended. Cesare's armor rusts, Lucrezia's silks have turned to dust, and Alexander's papal bulls gather the patina of ages in quiet archives. Yet, their name resonates still, a potent whisper in the long, shadowy corridors of history. You find yourself in this contemplative twilight, sifting through the layers of legend and fact, trying to understand the true measure of this extraordinary family, whose ambitions once shook the Italian peninsula to its core. The scent of those Valencian orange blossoms, a symbol of their distant, almost humble beginnings, now seems impossibly far removed from the blood-soaked battlefields of Romagna and the perfumed, perilous air of the Vatican. What, then, is the lasting legacy of the Borgias for centuries? Their name was almost universally reviled, a byword for cruelty, corruption, incest, and murder. The black legend of the Borgias, a potent narrative of almost cartoonish villainy, took firm root in the European imagination. This is a mainstream historical fact. The term Borgia became synonymous with the darkest aspects of Renaissance power politics. They were the ultimate Machiavellian villains before Machiavelli even published The Prince, which, ironically, drew inspiration from Cesare's methods. The Borgias got such bad press for so long, you'd almost think their public relations department had been permanently outsourced to their worst enemies. This formidable legend was not woven from whole cloth. Of course, as you've journeyed through their story, you've encountered the ruthlessness, the nepotism, the political maneuvering that gave rise to such a reputation. But it was also significantly amplified and distorted by their numerous enemies, the Roman barons they dispossessed, the Italian states whose ambitions they thwarted, rival cardinals like Giuliano della Rovere, and moral crusaders like Savonarola. Their Spanish origins also made them convenient scapegoats for Italian anxieties about foreign influence. Diaries like Johann Burchard's, with its scandalous details, and later histories written by those hostile to them, such as Francesco Guicciardini, cemented this dark image. These accounts, often taken at face value for generations, painted a picture of almost superhuman depravity. In more recent times, however, historians have sought a more nuanced understanding. The ongoing re-evaluation of the Borgias, attempting to discern the precise line between their verifiable actions and the layers of politically motivated calumny, represents a significant and evolving area of Renaissance historiography. This doesn't mean whitewashing their deeds or excusing their excesses. Rather, it involves placing them firmly within the context of their brutal, ambitious age. Were they uniquely evil? Or were they simply more successful, more flamboyant, and perhaps less hypocritical than many of their contemporaries who engaged in similar, if less spectacularly documented, behaviors? Other powerful families of the Italian Renaissance also used violence, bribery, and strategic marriages to advance their interests. The Borgias just seemed to do it with a certain unforgettable panache and on a grander, papal-backed scale. Looking beyond the scandals, some of their actual achievements come into focus. Pope Alexander VI, for all his faults, was a capable administrator, a skilled diplomat who navigated the treacherous waters of European politics for over a decade, and a significant patron of the arts who beautified Rome. He managed the church's finances often for his family's benefit. It's true, and dealt with complex issues like the division of the New World. Cesare Borgia, despite his ruthlessness, was undeniably a military genius and a skilled state builder. His campaigns in the Romagna, brief though their impact was, offered a model of centralized authority that impressed observers like Machiavelli, who saw in him the potential for an Italian unifier. His methods were harsh, but he often brought a measure of stability to regions previously torn apart by petty tyrants. Lucrezia, in Ferrara, demonstrably rose above her scandalous Roman youth to become a respected and beloved duchess, a patron of arts and letters, contributing to a golden age of culture in that city. Ultimately, however, their grand dynastic project failed. Cesare's Duchy of Romagna disintegrated almost immediately after Alexander's death. They left no lasting Borgia kingdom in Italy. Their power, so dazzling at its peak, proved ephemeral, built too heavily on the life of one pope and the military prowess of his son. Perhaps their story is a quintessential Renaissance tragedy ambition soaring to godlike heights, only to be brought crashing down by misfortune and the relentless turning of fortune's wheel. The Borgias certainly knew how to make an entrance and an exit from the historical stage, ensuring no one would ever quite forget their performance. And we haven't forgotten. The fascination with the Borgias endures, evident in countless books, films, and television series. Why do they continue to captivate our imaginations? Centuries later, is it the sheer audacity of their ambition, the dramatic juxtaposition of sacred power and worldly sin, the allure of their reputed dark glamour? Perhaps it's because their story touches upon timeless human themes, the seductive nature of power, the fierce bonds of family loyalty, the eternal struggle between morality and expediency, and the haunting question of how history remembers us. Trying to find a truly dull documentary or a dispassionate play about the Borgias is like trying to find a quiet, reflective corner during a citywide carnival. Their story naturally ignites drama and debate. As the first light of dawn begins to touch the horizon, softening the edges of the night, you reflect on this journey. You've walked through the moonlit streets of their Rome, peered into the shadowed recesses of their ambition, and witnessed the flickering candle of their fortunes. The Borgias were complex, contradictory figures, brilliant and brutal, pious and profane, creators and destroyers. Their story is a vivid, often uncomfortable, reminder of the complexities of the human heart and the enduring dilemmas of power. And now, as our long night together draws to a close, allow the echoes of their tale to gently recede. The grand palaces and shadowy chambers, the clash of swords and the whispered conspiracies, all begin to soften, to melt into the quietude that precedes the morning. Feel the tension of their world release its hold, replaced by a sense of calm, a gentle stillness. The figures of Alexander, Cesare, and Lucrezia, once so vivid and immediate, now drift back into the mists of time, their tumultuous lives finding their place in the vast, unending tapestry of history. Let the gentle rhythm of your own breathing guide you towards rest, towards that peaceful space where stories end and dreams begin. The intrigues of the past can rest now, as you find your own tranquility in the quiet of this moment. The soft glow of the moon, which has illuminated our journey, now becomes a gentle beacon, guiding you towards a deep and untroubled slumber. There are no more battles to be fought tonight, no more secrets to uncover, only the peaceful embrace of the approaching dawn and the promise of rest.